Okay, hello and welcome to lesson 4 of topic 27, functions. So the last two lessons, lesson 2 and lesson 3, we've been working on this bullet point here, finding composite functions. So first of all, finding things like f of g of x, and then substituting numbers into them was lesson 3, so f of g of 5, that sort of thing. So you should be able to tick that one off now, assuming you're happy with the questions that you've done and you're getting the majority of them correct. Now we're going to work on number 3 today, so finding the inverse of a linear function. But before we do that, we need to practice rearranging formulae. The name for that is changing the subject to the formula. So we need to practice that skill before we can attempt that. So I just need to remind you of how we go about rearranging formulae. Okay? So changing the subject of a formula would be your title for today. So copy that into your books. Okay, and then we're just going to work through a few examples where we have to make different letters the subject of the formula. Now the tricky part of this obviously is that a lot of these questions are different to each other, so you need to understand the principles rather than a set method for a particular question. Okay, so just make sure you spend some time thinking about how you would rearrange these, and make sure when you're practicing the questions that you pay attention to what the question is asking you, and don't feel constricted or constrained to a particular method. Just think about how do I isolate that particular term, that particular letter. Okay. So when we look at this, we're looking to make C the subject of this formula. Okay, so I want this letter to be C equals, and then the equation from there. So the first thing we're going to do is, if I've got F equals 5C negative, take away 8, I'm looking to move that 8 first of all. Okay, now that's negative 8 there, so I'm going to look to add 8 to both sides, which means I'm going to get F plus 8 equal to 5C. Now 5C here is 5 times C, so when I'm looking to move this 5, because I want just C on its own, when I'm looking to move that 5, because that's 5 times C, I need to divide by 5. So I get F plus 8 divided by 5 equals C. Okay, so that's your answer there. That's making C the subject of the formula. You can turn it round if you'd rather, just so it looks like that, so that you've got F, C equals, but it's the same thing. Those two things are the same thing there. Okay, so that's the first one. If you'd like to copy that one down, obviously, then take the time to do that. You don't have to copy all these examples down. I'm going to go through quite a few. The second one looks like this. So I'm looking to make A the subject. So when you've got a bracket like that, the first thing we want to do is to expand the bracket. So x equals 3a plus 27. And then at this stage, it's very similar to the previous question, where I'm looking to make A the subject. So I want to move the 27, which means subtracting 27 from both sides. And then I've got 3a here, so I need to divide by 3. Which gives me x minus 27 over 3. And that's my answer. And again, you can turn that round if you'd rather, but that is mathematically correct there. So third example, slightly more difficult this time. Not massively, it's just a case of understanding how to do the opposite of squaring something. So we're looking to make n the subject here. So m equals n squared plus 3. First thing I need to do is move the 3. And then finally, just making sure I understand that if I've got n squared there, the opposite of squaring something is to do the square root of it. Therefore, I need to square root both sides. And then with this side, I can write that, but I should at this point be able to understand that when I square something and square root it, I'm left with that original value. So if you think about the idea of 5, if you were to square 5 makes 25, then square root it again gets you back to 5. So the square root of n squared is in fact just n. So that's the end of that question. Okay, we've made n the subject there. And as I said earlier, feel free to pause, copy some of these examples down if you need to. Next example looks like this. So y equals 2x plus 3 divided by 4. And so the first thing I'm looking to do is to move this 4. Okay, I can't move that 3 initially. okay, because it's part of a fraction. So I need to get rid of that fraction, I need to move the 4 before I can do anything else. So I'm going to times by 4 on both sides there. Now the reason I'm timesing by 4 is because this is being divided by 4. So I want to always do the opposite, I want to work backwards. So timesing that by 4 times that by 4. So I get 4y equals, when I multiply this by 4, similar to the previous concept of square rooting and squaring, it's going to cancel out just to leave what I've got initially. So this expression here, 2x plus 3 divided by 4, then times by 4, will get you back to 2x plus 3. The other way to think about it is that this cancels with that, so you can think about it that way. Now from here, it's relatively similar to some of these other examples we've done. Move 3. And then divide by 2. And that's your answer. Okay, next example. Just slightly different again. When you look at something like this, it's important to understand where the square root is and the fact that the square root is around the whole expression here. Okay, so you've got a equals the square root of b plus 2 divided by 5. Now, because the square root is around the whole expression, I need to get rid of that square root sign first. Now, the opposite of square rooting is to square. So I need to square both sides first of all, which means I get a squared here. And again, we talked about this in the third example. The idea that square rooting and squaring are inverse functions, they're opposite functions. So therefore, when I've got a square root there and I'm squaring it, it just disappears because they cancel out and I'm left with what I had in originally. Now from here, we need to move the 5, which means timesing by 5. I'm always going to write the whole number in front of the algebra there. And then finally, get rid of the 2. And that's your answer there. Okay, so that's all the examples I've got there. Now there's a number of questions that you can practice on in the booklet. I want you to be spending around kind of half an hour just practicing those skills. You don't have to work through them from start to finish. There's all sorts of different types of rearranging there. So the key is to spend around half an hour doing that and practicing the rearranging skills, because the next lesson you're going to need to use rearranging to be able to find the inverse of a function. Okay? So any questions, please email your teachers. All right, thank you.